Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Local Food System Infrastructure Grant webinar. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Galen Van Horn. I'm the Local Food Infrastructure and Supply Chain Specialist with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. I'm excited to spend the next hour providing an overview of the Local Food System Infrastructure Grant Program for the fall of 2023. I'm joined by my colleagues Ivy Fox and Sarah Lemon, who will be also supporting this grant program. If you'd like to hear this presentation in Spanish, we have a simultaneous translator who is working on a separate audio channel. And to access that audio channel, I have a little guide here on the screen. You can click the interpretation button, that little globe-looking thing, and then you can pivot between English and Spanish. The webinar is being recorded, and so it will be posted on the grant website afterwards. Fernando, would you like to pop over and just invite people into the Spanish side in Spanish?
Sí, perdón. Por favor, si requieren servicios de interpretación de esta presentación sobre subversiones, sobre infraestructura del sistema alimentario local, por favor, vayan al globo del mundo, abajo en el menú, y elijan bajo idioma español.
Thank you, thank you. So some housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, as I just mentioned. It'll be posted on the grant website in the next week or so, depending on how much time that takes. Please stay muted unless speaking to eliminate any background noise and distractions. Feel free to have your camera on or off, whichever is more comfortable for you. We won't be taking questions as we go, but we should have time for Q&A at the end. If you have questions as we go, you can type them into the chat box, which is a little button on your Zoom screen that says chat with a little message icon. My colleagues will be helping me make sure that we get to all the questions in the chat. Feel free to also join one of our upcoming Q&A sessions, question and answer sessions. Those are listed on the grant website as well. They're going to be drop-in office hours style, and so it won't be recorded. But it'll be a great way if you have a specific question to get that answered. Okay, moving right along. Our agenda today is kind of 8 parts. Well, this introduction here that I just gave, and then we'll go in, or an introduction, I guess, to the Regional Markets Program and the Washington State Department of Agriculture. I'll do an overview of the grant program. I'll go over the grant categories that you can apply in. There's 2 grant categories. Go over the funding priorities and kind of the evaluation criteria that will be used to score the applications to this grant. We'll go over allowable costs and costs that are not allowable. We'll go over specifically how to apply on the grant website. And then hopefully we'll have some time for questions. I'm not sure how much that will be, but as I mentioned, those Q&A sessions are scheduled over the next several weeks. There's, I think, 17 options for you to attend. So hopefully one of those works for you. And then we'll have just closing at the end. Okay, let's get going. So the Local Food System Infrastructure Grant is a project of the WSDA Regional Markets Program. So we're a program within the larger WSDA. And we support our goal is to support the economic viability of the small and direct marketing farms. That we also do increase the availability of Washington-grown, caught, and raised foods in schools, institutions, and on tables throughout our state. We do this through providing technical assistance, resources, and publications, like the Green Book, if folks are familiar with the Green Handbook, market access and development coordination, outreach and educational events, partnerships and promotions. And you can learn more about the Regional Markets Program on our website by searching WSDA Small Farms. in your preferred web browser, or I think one of my colleagues can just link our main page at some point. Thank you, Sarah. So we also provide grants, and this is kind of new for this program over the past 2 or 3 years. And one of them is the Local Food System Infrastructure Grant. So in the current Washington State budget biennium, 2023 to 2025, the Washington State Legislature approved ongoing funding of $8 million per biennium for Washington State Department of Agriculture, that's us, to provide local food system infrastructure and market access grants. They also provided $1 million in one-time federal coronavirus recovery funds for meat processing capacity grants and technical assistance. And so those are going to be rolled into the same program here, the fall 2023 application. We know that one of the biggest barriers to Washington's small and mid-sized farms and food businesses is that food system infrastructure is scaled for large quantities of product destined for national and international markets, which is fine and all, but it makes it inaccessible for the small and mid-sized farms and food businesses. So the purpose of the Local Food System Infrastructure Grant is to support local food supply chains and market access for farms, ranches, and other food businesses. Our intention is to fund projects that expand and strengthen collaboration across the linkages in the regional food supply chain. This includes planning, equipment, and facilities that support post-harvest handling, aggregation, processing, manufacturing, storing, distribution, and sale of Washington-grown, caught, and raised foods. We're really excited to be able to continue offering this grant with ongoing funding. We hope these grants will accomplish WSDA's dual goals of assuring the safety, integrity, and availability of the food supply, and support the marketing of the state's agricultural products at the local level. So all the information in this presentation can be found on the grant website. And I put it here on the screen. Will take you to the grant opportunities page. It's just a much shorter link, so it's easier to copy. And then there's a big banner that says Local Food System Infrastructure Grant that you can click through. Or you can also, right now, my colleague Sarah Lemon, just in the chat, just put a link to the Local Food System Infrastructure Grant website. I'm going to say this many times throughout the presentation, but please be sure to read the grant guidelines before you fill out the application. The grant guidelines are kind of all of the information that it's helpful to have in your head when you're applying, kind of all the options of what you can do with the grant. So starting off, who can apply? So we have 3 categories of eligible applicants. The first one is owner-operated farms or ranches in Washington with less than 1 million in annual gross cash farm income in the year 2022. And they also have to sell some portion of their product in Washington state or within 250 miles of the farm or ranch. So it has to be a local seller. And an owner-operated farm is one in which the majority of the business is owned by the person or people involved in the day-to-day on-farm operations, including cooperatively owned and operated farms or ranches. The second category is a non-farm food business with less than $5 million in annual revenue in the year 2022 and fewer than 200 employees. The non-farm food business's primary function should be to gather, process, manufacture, move, store, or sell foods grown, caught, or raised in Washington. So if the food business does not use foods grown, caught, or raised in Washington, they are not eligible for this grant program. There are some additional details about that category that you can find in the grant guidelines, including how to count revenue and employee counts. The third category is a nonprofit, tribal, or local government entity. This includes ports. That is directly enabling small and mid-sized Washington farms, ranches, or food businesses to access or improve their aggregation, processing, distribution of Washington-grown foods, or otherwise directly enabling their access to markets within Washington, for example, like a farmer's market. So that's who can apply. Next, let's turn to the timeline. So the application portal opened on October 6th, 2023, and it will close. The applications are due November 15th, 2023, 11:59 p.m. We're anticipating announcing awards in early February 2024, and the grant period in which you do your project will depend on the grant category that you choose in your application, which we'll go over in just a minute. I'll note here too that this grant will continue to be available in the future with additional rounds and opportunities to apply in 2024, 2025, and beyond. And so we strongly encourage interested entities to plan ahead to apply when it's right for you, when it's right for your capacity, your needs, and it's right for your experience. I'll note here that this is a reimbursement style grant. We recognize this is tough for small businesses. This means grant recipients will not receive upfront payment. Grant recipients will need to make purchases and payments with their own funds first, and then submit those receipts to WSDA through the grant portal, and then WSDA will make payment to the grantee for expenses that are part of their approved project budget. Unfortunately, we're not authorized under Washington state law to pay funds in advance of expenditures the way that our Washington state constitution is written at this time. Oh, coming back here, I'll just note that you can, as soon as you don't have to complete your entire grant project before you get reimbursed. You can do partial reimbursements as long as once a part of your project has been completed, and reimbursements are typically returned in 3 to 4 weeks of having been approved by the WSDA team. About a month turnaround. Okay, moving on to the grant categories. This is a big decision point for applicants. We have 2 grant categories in the fall 2023 round, depending on the project's timeline and complexity. The first category, category A here, is rapid and ready. That's $10,000 up to $75,000. And those projects will start, as I mentioned before, sometime in February 2024, and then will need to end by June 30th, 2024. So these are quick turnaround projects, hence the name. All funds need to be spent, and parts of your project budget need to be completed by June 30th, 2024. So these are for straightforward project and equipment purchases that can be completed on a short timeline. The grant category may also be a good fit for a standalone component or phase of a larger project, and in preparation for maybe applying for a bigger grant in the future. Proposed rapid and ready projects that involve contractors or building improvements should have a current binding quote from a contractor and all necessary permits approved and in hand. Applicants should have upfront funds in place to start and finish a reimbursement style grant within a short timeline. Rapid and ready projects likely address like one specific infrastructure gap that is limiting a farm or food business's growth and market access, or may strengthen just a single linkage in the local food supply chain. So then the second grant category, category B, are large projects. We couldn't come up with a cute name for that wasn't just confusing, so we just called it large projects. And these are projects that are over $75,000 up to $500,000. And they have a longer timeline. So they'll start the same time in February 2024, but they'll go till June 30th, 2025, 17 months total. Large project grants are for more complex projects with longer timelines. This grant is best fit for projects that include design, permitting, planning, or coordination steps that need to be completed before other project activities can occur, such as the purchase and installation of new equipment or improvements to a physical facility. This grant is also a good fit for projects that require coordination between various project partners, such as collaborative marketing, market access efforts. Large projects are likely to address multiple gaps and improve various linkages in the local food system. And the final note on the slide here, there is no requirement for applicants to provide matching funds. So that's for both grant categories. The amount that you submit for in your application is the full amount that you will receive in reimbursements. In the fall 2023 round, WSDA, and we anticipate awarding approximately $6 million in grants. And the number of grants in each project category is just going to depend on the number of applications received. We have our funding divided between the 2 state fiscal years. So that's why we kind of have these dates of June 30th is when the state fiscal year ends in 2024. And so for rapid and ready projects, they're just going to be done by the end of the state fiscal year. For large projects, you'll actually be straddling 2 fiscal years. So if you're applying for a large project, you'll see in the budget section some help text about dividing all your expenses into either occurring before June 30th, 2024, because that's when they need to happen, or after June 30th, 2025. So you can't have something that you spent money on in April of 2024 that you then get reimbursed for in September of 2024, because that crosses that June 30th line. If you have things that are going to not be completed fully, and they're between the start of the large project and the end, you'll just break those pieces into portions that happen before June 30th, 2024, and portions that happen after June 30th, 2024. Applicants are encouraged to apply for an amount of funding that is the right size to achieve your goals, is appropriate for the stage, capacity, and experience of your operation, and is achievable within the project timeline. Reasonableness of the budget relative to the impact and achievability of the proposed project will be key parts of scoring applications. And we'll get to more details on the application scoring. Next up, allowable costs. So allowable expenses must directly support the grant purpose to improve local food supply chains and market access for farms, ranches, food businesses. So this includes planning, equipment, and or facilities for on-farm post-harvest handling, aggregation, processing, manufacturing, storing, distribution, or sales of Washington grown, caught, or raised foods. There is a longer list of examples of allowable expenses at the end of the grant guidelines. So there's another area where I highly recommend people looking at the grant guidelines. A note on facility improvements. Applicants must ensure that facility improvements comply with all applicable licenses and permit requirements by state, county, or other local jurisdictions for their type of facility. For example, like a food processing license or a dairy license or a food storage license. There are questions about licensing and permits on the application as well. Okay, allowable costs, part 2. Expenses that are not eligible include, but are not limited to, and This is just a short list of things that I think people need to know most. There are additional expenses, uh, unallowable, not allowed costs in the grant guidelines. But the three I wanted to highlight here are there are no pre-harvest expenses. There should not be in your proposed budget. Things like greenhouses, tractors, irrigation equipment. This is really for post-harvest projects. No ongoing operating costs. So like purchasing food, if you're a food processor, that's an ongoing operating cost. It's not eligible, or just staff members that you want to support their general wages. That's an ongoing operating cost. If it's something that directly supports completion of the proposed project, so if you have a staff member that is directly working on installing equipment or repairing a facility or building a facility, then that would be eligible. And then finally on the list here, you cannot request reimbursement for costs incurred or payments made prior to the grant agreement start date. So you can't apply to receive reimbursement for things that you've already purchased. It needs to happen after you have successfully been awarded a grant and you have entered into a grant agreement with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. That's when you can start making purchases and for reimbursement. Next up, the evaluation criteria, or kind of the scoring that I mentioned just a few slides ago. So this is a competitive grant. Applications will be scored out of 78 possible points, and we have 3 different sections of the evaluation criteria: achievability, 24 points, impact business viability, 16 points, and benefit to local food supply chains and market access, 32 points. Within achievability, what we're looking for is that the project description is clear, reasonable, and achievable on the project timeline. The applicant entity has experience with the proposed work, including past projects and or appropriate staff or business partners. That the project description and budget details indicate a sufficient stage of planning and readiness. And finally, that the proposed budget is reasonable and appropriate for the scope and scale of the project. Within the impact to business viability section, we're looking for the degree to which the project adds additional sales channels, or the degree to which it increases the ability to perform in existing sales channels for the applicant organization. So if it's a business applying, it's for the business that is applying. Another area we're looking for is the degree to which the project would increase the viability of the applicant organization, the business viability of the applicant organization in any other ways, such as general business planning or management, workforce capability, worker safety, operational efficiency, food safety, waste management, or humane handling, things like that don't necessarily have to do with sales channels. And then finally, in the impact to business viability section, we're looking for the degree to which the projected improvement to business viability seems reasonable given the proposed project and the applicant's current operation and or level of planning. The third section, benefit to local food supply chains and market access. This is kind of the system-wide impacts that we're looking for. And so those include the degree to which the project adds additional sales channels for other farms or food businesses in the regional food supply chain, and the degree to which the project increases the ability to perform in existing sales channels for other farms or food businesses within the regional food supply chain. So we're incentivizing projects that are going to benefit multiple farms, ranches, food businesses, multiple linkages within the food supply chain. We're also looking for the degree to which the projected improvement in the capacity of the regional food supply chain seems reasonable, given the proposed project and the applicant's current operation level of planning. 3 more here. The degree to which the project directly addresses a specific gap or barrier within Washington's local and regional food supply chain. and the degree to which the applicant organization is clear about the specific farms, ranches, food businesses, and community stakeholders the project will benefit. And finally, the degree to which the project expands access to specific culturally relevant foods or food processing services. So all those taken together will add up to the 78 possible points, and all of those sections relate back directly to portions of the application, like specific questions on the application. So I would recommend, as you're filling out the application, making sure that you're pulling up the grant guidelines and looking at these evaluation criteria consistently and making sure that you feel like you are answering questions in a way that is going to relate well with the evaluation criteria here. Bonus slide on the evaluation criteria. There are bonus points for new grant recipients and small businesses. So if you've received less than $100,000 in grant awards from WSDA regional markets in the past 3 years, you get a 4-point bump. And if you are a small farm, ranch, or food businesses, so for small farms and ranches, that's less than $350,000 in gross cash farm income in 2022, or small food businesses other than farms or ranches with less than $500,000 in annual revenues in 2022. That's worth 2 additional points. Okay, so we've made it to the how to apply section. So we're through the information in the grant guidelines, and now we're going to get kind of more into the nuts and bolts here. So the first step is to navigate to the grant website. And I've linked here kind of our grant opportunities webpage because it's easy to write down or type if you want to do that. But also my colleague, Sarah, I think is going to put a link to our grant website in the chat if that's easier for folks. Folks have maybe already found the grant website as well. Oh, she just put the link to the grant portal, which we'll get to there. On the grant webpage, there's an apply here button, and that will take you to the grant portal, which Sarah Lemon just put into the chat. Yeah, so now there's both the grant webpage and the grant portal. And that's where you'll kind of sign up to apply for the grant, and you'll create a profile within the grant portal. And then you'll be able to sign into the grant portal with your sign up and complete your application questions, prepare your project budget, and then select the submit button before November 15th, 2023 at 11:59 p.m. And that's it. You did it. Congratulations. What does that actually look like? I've got some screen captures here. So this is what our grant webpage looks like. The WSDA Local Food System Infrastructure Grants. And if you scroll down on that page, you'll get down to a how to apply section. And that's that apply here button that I mentioned. And that takes you off of this WSDA grant webpage, and it takes you to the grant portal webpage. Before I show that grant portal webpage, you can scroll down a little further and you get to resources to help you. I just wanted to highlight that there are additional resources to help you at the bottom of the grant webpage. And there's those links I mentioned for signing up for office hours, question and answer office hours. So back here, you click the apply button or you click the grant portal link in the chat here, and you should come to a page that looks like this. You sign in or sign up with your existing email and password. I'll note that if multiple people will be working on one application, you'll need to share the email, username, and password with each other. Each application can only have one login. In the top right, also note that in the top right, there's a globe icon circled in yellow there, highlighted in yellow. you can select that, and then this pop-up box will come when you can translate the grant portal and application materials into many different languages. However, I'll note that applications must still be submitted in English. You do need to create, I'm just going to pop back to this slide. So once you've signed up in there, you'll be able to create a profile, and you do need to create a profile in order to see the application. But if you want to just quickly go through that, you can just enter dummy information that you can always go back and edit later if you just want to quickly finish your profile and then see what the application looks like. Okay, so we have created our profile, and that gets us to this additional slide here. So if you're awarded a grant, you may also need to register for a unique entity ID number through sam.gov. So I should say this is, I'm putting this here because you may wish to start this process before you apply. You do not need to have register with sam.gov to apply, but this is because I mentioned earlier those $1 million in meat capacity funding is federal funds, and so projects that are pulling from that budget will need to register with sam.gov. So I just wanted to give people a heads up on that. It will likely be for local meat processing grants. Okay, so now we've got the profile started. Now the application is available to you, and there are 2 application sections to complete. The first section is the application questions, and then the second section is the proposed budget. And this is on the bottom of the screen here. This is what it actually looks like in the grant portal. So you can click open on either of those. Applicant. And so then looking at the application questions section, this includes information like your organization name and info, contact information, and like the authorized representative who will actually sign a grant agreement. Some of this information will be copied over from the profile you created in the first step. So when you're making that profile, you actually are saving yourself work for the application as well. So you don't have to recreate that. If you need to change this information, you can go back into the grant portal homepage and select the edit button next to your profile. Like I mentioned, you can always edit your profile. There's also an eligibility check in the application. It'll provide you with a few yes or no questions to assess your organization's eligibility for this grant program. It shows just the first one it will show is like, are you a small farm? And if you're not, hit no, and then it'll give you another option for, are you a food, or are you a farm, owner operated farm? Yes or no. Are you a food business? Yes or no. And then finally, are you any of the other eligible applicants? Yes or no. The organization overview includes a brief written description of the organization and multiple choice questions for the geographic areas in which you operate or serve, as well as if the operation currently holds any food licenses, inspections, or permits. The project proposal is where you select your project category, rapid and ready or large, and you provide information specific to what you plan to use grant funds to accomplish. Large projects have a few additional questions and file upload options. I'll also note here that anything that you put in your application may be subject to a public disclosure. So any kind of proprietary company information, you'll want to be careful with how you kind of talk about that or share that. Also note that you can save your application questions and come back to them later. So you can save it as a draft. You don't have to finish it in one go or anything. That's a way that you could work on it with other people too. You'll want to save it and then they can come in. I don't think it's a good idea to try and be working in it at the same time. You might end up saving over each other's work. So the other section of the application, as I mentioned, there's two sections, is the budget, proposed budget section. Sorry, typo there. I'm actually just going to go ahead and fix it so we don't have confusion. It's called the proposed budget. And so the first step in your proposed budget is you'll select the type of costs that you, from a drop-down menu of kind of just big categories of costs. And there's even an other section if you feel like one of those categories doesn't apply to you. And then there's also kind of detailed categories of types of costs. And that's also another way that you can kind of think about eligible costs, is looking at those drop-down menus. Then you'll describe the activity or the item that will be purchased, kind of the specific brand or size or model, make. If it's like building materials, you can say building materials for the wash pack shed. So kind of like how you want the item to be listed on your budget. You're creating line items in your budget. So you don't want your budget to have too few line items. If it's just one line item for constructing a $400,000 root vegetable processing facility, then there won't be enough detail for reviewers to understand who is responsible for the purchase and the other stuff here. But at the same time, I think the maximum is 500 budget line items. If you submit 500 budget line items, it's going to be hard for reviewers to get through every single line item. So there's no right or wrong answer. Just be thinking like, what makes sense in terms of how detailed to get in terms of your level of in terms of what's in a single budget line item and what can be grouped into one budget line item. So finishing up what happens when you're kind of putting together your budget, you'll describe the activity or item that will be purchased, who will be responsible for purchasing the item, whether that's the business owner, operator, or if you hired someone else to do it, then they would be responsible for completing the work. So it's kind of helpful just to know if you have a team of organizations or people working on this project, the estimated date when the work will be completed, keeping in mind that June 30th, 2024 date as being really important as the end of the Rapid and Ready projects, and as sort of like the not midpoint, but before and after time for the large projects, where you'll have costs that happen before that date and costs that happen after that date, and they can't mix. You'll put an estimate of the cost for that line item, quoted or estimate, and then you'll note if this activity is prioritized for partial funding. In the first round of local food system infrastructure grants, everyone received partial funding so that we could award more awards. And so it's helpful in your budget to kind of think about what are the like really key things that I want to prioritize for partial funding, and then maybe what are a few additional things that would be really helpful, but not totally necessary. Okay. The final part, once you've completed the application questions and the proposed budget, is the application submission. And it just looks like a nice green submit button. It's gray before you complete the first two sections. And then when it's green, you can submit it. Your application is not fully submitted until you click that button. So definitely when you're ready, you can click that, and you'll get an email that notifies you that your application has been submitted and it's under review. But if you wake up in a panic a few days later and the grant deadline still hasn't passed, and you're like, oh my gosh, did I really say that? And I want to change it, then you can still go back in and edit it until that November 15th, 11:59 Pacific time deadline. but you will need to resubmit it. So if you go back to edit your application after you've submitted it, you'll need to submit it again. That green button will be gray, and then when you complete it again, it'll be green for you to submit. So finally, just in terms of the application, a few tips for success. We highly, highly recommend you read the grant guidelines carefully. We have a copy in Spanish already posted on the grant website. If you want a copy in any other language, I'll have my email address on the slide in a little bit. Reach out. I'll be happy to get that to you. There's also frequently asked questions posted on the grant website. Those are helpful and just kind of thinking through what other questions other people are asking. And you can consider attending Q&A office hours, question and answer office hours. That's another great way to so one way that people used it last application period was they would just work on their application during the office hours. And if a question came up, they could just unmute and ask their question and get it answered. And yeah, it's just a good way to help you understand all the important grant requirements and details. And then again, as you're answering the questions, be thinking about those grant evaluation criteria in the grant guidelines, and make sure your answers show how the project aligns with the grant purpose that we have there. And so as you're writing, like, don't assume the reviewer understands the industry or sector as well as you do. Offer more explanation than maybe you think you need. Write short sentences, and definitely have a trusted friend or two read your application for clarity and completeness. One thing you can do is when you have the grant application open, you can, in your web browser, you can just print the page. And that's a way, if you wanted to share it with someone else, you could share it that way. Or if you just wanted to share your login, if you trusted them, you could do it that way. Okay. It's 4:45. We've made it to the questions. And so we'll, since we have a lot of people in the call, we have 94 people in the call right now. Please use the raise the hand function or type in your questions. And I'm gonna actually...
We have quite a few existing.
Yeah. We're gonna start with the ones that have in order, and my colleague is gonna help ask the questions, and then I'll take lead on answering. And if we can't answer it now, we'll get back to you. And then I'm also just gonna put up this last slide here, which has contact information from me, and then the grant webpage there if you wanted to type that in and register for an upcoming Q&A session. All right.
Are you ready for that? For the first question, is there a certain percentage of Washington farm products that must be sold by a non-farm food business to qualify?
There's not a certain percentage, but there's a section of the application where you'll talk about your operation. You should talk about and the farms that you serve. And so you'll talk about what that looks like in terms of the products, where you source your products. And then if you have a value-added product like a jam or a sauce or a spice, there's a section where you'll talk about your recipe and what part of your recipe is Washington grown. And if no part of your recipe is Washington grown, then you shouldn't apply.
Yeah. Next question. Can anyone who bought a farm in 2023 qualify, or only if they had a farm in 2022? And I think there'd be a differentiation between landowners and business ownership too.
That's a good question. Since our eligibility criteria is income based or revenue based from the year 2022, I think you are still eligible, but we'll get a FAQ up on how you should be thinking about your revenue in terms of averaging it over the last 10 months. It's probably what it will look like.
And it is okay if you didn't own the land, but you were a business that was existing and leasing elsewhere and had to move. So
Correct. I
tons of
think
details around that.
correct. Yeah. You'll want to kind of just talk about that in your application and talk about your, that the landowner is on board with the improvements, and you may consider also purchasing equipment or facilities that are movable, so that if you did have to move your operation, that you could bring those improvements with you.
Great. Our application is going to be weighted by an equity consideration.
They are weighted exactly how they were presented here on the slide. So our equity considerations are those bonus points where we're prioritizing funds for folks who haven't received grants previously, and for small farms and small food businesses.
Real easy one. Can I see the application without creating a profile?
I mentioned this. I saw that question pop up and I was on the in the presentation. You do need to create a profile. It's just a requirement of our grant portal. We did add a few more questions into the profile this year, so I realize that's kind of annoying, but we do need you to. Thank you.
Is the COVID fund only for meat? If so, why?
Yeah, the COVID fund is only for meat because that is what the Washington State Legislature directed us to do. We are requesting ongoing funding for our local meat processing capacity and technical assistance program, which is kind of a separate regional markets program, or has been a separate regional markets program from the local food system infrastructure grant. That said, meat projects are still eligible for that other pot of funding as well, for the 8 million. They just said do local food infrastructure grants with $8 million, and then they said do specifically local meat processing capacity support with that $1 million. That's the Washington State Legislature said that, so that's why. If
I have a non-meat related and a meat related project, would I submit 2 separate grant requests?
No. If each organization should only submit 1 application. So you can combine it into both. The registering for that SAM number, it's not an insurmountable barrier. That's really the biggest difference between the two grant funding pots, and so we'll definitely support you through that. And so that kind of difference between those funding streams should not be a big consideration for how you apply.
Are there examples of past projects that have received the grant, and an example of the budget and proposal?
Yeah, well, the budget and proposal was different in the last application round, so it wouldn't be as helpful this round, but we are gonna get just a list of the projects back up on the website that were funded last round, and including a description of like what was funded for folks. So I'll make sure that is updated on the FAQ when we get that up there.
And I'll post into the chat again just a couple examples from our blog of past grant recipients.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that link is in the chat now.
If a farm packs and sells its own fruit, is it considered just a farm, or can be considered a non-farm business in terms of annual income?
If you are an operating farm, then you choose farm first. Yes.
And the income is whatever your business, your UBI is under, right? So like your income is what your gross business income is.
Yeah, for the farms, it's the gross farm income.
Okay, I heard you say you were going to be awarded 6 million in grants. This means if all the awardees were large projects and all were awarded the maximum, this would only be 12 grantees. Do you have restrictions in place that will limit the number of large projects you plan to fund?
It's highly unlikely that, I mean, we do, at the end of the day, WSDA has discretion on funding, and just given the impact that small projects had in the first round of local food system infrastructure grant, I find it very hard to believe that there are 12 $500,000 projects that would beat out any of the smaller projects. So definitely don't think that applying for the highest amount possible is going to score the highest. As I mentioned, kind of the reasonableness of the budget and the like the impact are going to be big scoring categories.
Can building upgrades, I'm thinking a new wiring panel in a barn associated with your project, be included?
Definitely. Yeah. As long as they're associated with post-harvest processing, distribution, or sale, as long as they're supporting your ability to do that, then that sounds very eligible.
If purchasing animals for a slaughter facility, do the animals have to be purchased from a WA producer for the project to be eligible?
Purchasing food is generally not an allowable grant category because that's typically an ongoing cost that isn't associated with like a project that expands access. So it's probably just purchasing food as a grant proposal is not eligible or won't score well.
I'd just add that for the processing specific ones, you have to be supporting direct to market producers, farmers and ranchers. So somebody that buys in meat and then packs under a different brand would not be eligible.
Thanks.
Okay. Next one. Is it possible to get full funding after you've been awarded partial funding?
It's not likely.
Yeah.
I wouldn't definitely never plan for that. What you're awarded is likely. We would first, if we had additional funding, we would first award other high scoring applications that weren't awarded initially before we thought about expanding existing grants.
And Stephanie, I see your hand up and I'll get back to you real soon. Can you use grant funds for single season contractors since that won't be ongoing?
If it's just in terms of your business operation, if it's just kind of what you, as normal course of business, you hire contractors, then that is not a eligible cost. That would be considered an ongoing operating cost. If it's a contractor to help you with a project that is going to expand your market access, then that would be eligible.
I don't think this is necessarily related to this. Is there any discussion for WSDA to implement a program allowing in-state retail sales for state inspected meat, such as program implemented in Wyoming recently? This meaning not requiring USDA inspected slaughter, asking as this may change the plan for our project. I don't think for this year that would be relevant.
Yeah, I mean, not at this time, I'm not aware of that happening anytime soon, but that definitely is something that we know would be very helpful, and we're interested in supporting.
Is there any benefit submitting earlier versus submitting closer to the November deadline? I'm going to go ahead and.
Yep, no benefit.
Yeah, it's rolling. To clarify, are food purchases and staff time as part of building sustainability for increased food distributions appropriate? Example, a nonprofit working to build sustainable systems for local procurement and distribution.
I don't think it would score as well as like specific equipment needed in order for those distribution systems to work well. kind of those ongoing operating costs are not really suited to this grant. For hunger relief, we do actually have the whole hunger relief section at the WSDA, and we'll link in the FAQ their grants.
Can you purchase used equipment with grant funds?
Yes, you can purchase used equipment. We really highly discourage people to use cash. We have a bill of sale example that you can use to record the sale, and then if they'll take like a cashier's check, that would be great, because we need to see a record of that payment being processed.
And I know we only have 2 minutes left, so I want to be mindful of that, and a reminder just of those great Q&A office hours sessions that you mentioned too that we still have.
Yeah, and we'll still take your questions down and we'll add them to the FAQ if we can follow up with people as well.
Yeah, anything in the meeting chat I am recording. Would you fund a proposal that's requesting partial funds, for example, $1 million project that's requesting $500,000?
Totally. Yeah, if you have other financing lined up and you want to talk about that, and this is part of the proposal, or if this is just the first phase and you have a plan for getting to the next phase, then you can talk about that in your application.
Can you submit both a short-term and long-term application? Should they be submitted together?
No, in terms of the rapid and ready and large projects, you'll select one of those. So you'll either have a project that ends next June, or you'll have a project that ends June 2025. And a milking parlor would be considered eligible for the sale of milk, yes.
Can you share the regional markets team view on supporting a youth nonprofit urban farm and gleaning organization to support infrastructure for value-added products? We would share our equipment and tool lending library with our farmer network, but sales for food production are more tailored towards sharing food with community partners and individuals.
So this grant is tailored towards expanding market access for Washington grown cotton raised food, and specifically food businesses and farms ranches. So there will be sections of the application where you will talk about that. So it sounds like that might be more of a youth program that is not as applicable for this grant project, but we should talk more about that.
If I have 2 relatively small rapid and ready projects, which together would likely sum under 75,000, should I just include both of them in a grant application, or are we really limited to one distinct project?
No, if they're both less than 75K, you can definitely include them in one application. So in effect, your application could have kind of 2 parts to it. It could have one part that's working on your milking parlor, and another part that's working on like planning for building out a new milk processing facility, or a dairy cheese cave or something like that, which would be kind of could be 2 parts. And I'm gonna go ahead and have to call it there. I have actually 5-month-old twins that I can hear crying in the next room, and I should relieve my partner. I told her that I would be done at 5. Thank you all so much. If you have your hand up, can you please take some time to write your question into the chat so we can record that? And again, just thank you all so much for your time. We will be in touch, answering all your questions over the next several weeks. And yeah.